The ballroom glowed with gold and crystal, but Ilara stood in the shadows, half hidden behind a marble pillar, her gloved hands clenched so tightly her fingers ached. Laughter drifted past her like music meant for someone else. Her sister Seraphine stood at the center of it all, radiant in silk and jewels, her smile practiced and perfect. Their father leaned close to the Duke of Ravenshallow, his voice low but sharp enough for Ilara to hear. "Take the pretty one," he said, nodding toward Seraphine as if choosing a horse from a stable. "She will please you, the other. She is not suited for a man of your rank." Ilara felt the words strike like a slap. She had learned long ago to be invisible, to accept the scraps of affection left behind after Seraphine had taken her share. Her mother's portrait watched from the wall, eyes kind but powerless, and Ilara wondered if this was all her life would ever be, standing aside while others decided her worth. When the Duke turned, she braced herself for the familiar dismissal. Instead, his gaze stopped on her, not a glance, not a polite flicker, but a steady, searching look that made her breath catch. He stepped away from Seraphine's admiring circle and approached Ilara directly, the murmurs around them swelling into shocked whispers. "You," he said quietly, offering his hand, "will you walk with me?" Her father's face drained of color. Seraphine's smile froze. Ilara hesitated, every lesson of obedience screaming at her to refuse. But something in the Duke's eyes, curiosity without cruelty, respect without pity, gave her courage she didn't know she possessed. She placed her hand in his. As they crossed the floor, the music seemed to follow them, softer and deeper, as if the room itself had shifted. The Duke asked her questions no one had ever asked before: what she read, what she dreamed of, what she feared. And Ilara answered honestly, her voice trembling at first, then growing steady. For the first time, she felt seen not as a lesser sister, but as herself. By the end of the night, when the Duke announced his intention to court Ilara, the room erupted, not in applause, but in disbelief. Her father protested, her sister wept, but the Duke's decision did not waver. As Ilara left the ballroom on his arm, fear mixed with hope in her chest. She knew the path ahead would not be gentle, but for the first time it would be her own. The carriage ride to Ravenshallow passed in silence, broken only by the rhythm of hooves on stone. Ilara watched the city fade into darkness, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. When they arrived, the Duke helped her down, not with the flourish of a conqueror, but with the care of a man who understood weight, of choices, of consequences. Days turned into weeks, and Ilara discovered a world she had never been allowed to imagine. The Duke encouraged her to speak at council dinners, to study the ledgers, to walk the lands and listen to the people who worked them. She stumbled, she doubted herself, but each time she faltered, he stood beside her, not in front of her. Letters from home grew colder. Rumors followed her like shadows, that she had bewitched the Duke, that he would regret choosing the rejected sister. When a bad harvest threatened the estate, the whispers grew louder, blaming her presence for every misfortune. One night, overwhelmed, Ilara stood alone on the battlements, the wind tugging at her cloak. She wondered if she should leave, spare him the burden of her existence. The Duke found her there, listening without interruption as she poured out every fear she had swallowed for years. When she finished, he did not offer hollow comfort. He offered truth. "I chose you," he said simply, "not in spite of who you are, but because of it." When crisis struck in earnest, workers ready to abandon the land, creditors demanding payment, it was Ilara who stepped forward. She proposed changes her father would have mocked: fair wages, shared risk, investment in the people who had always been treated as expendable. The Duke backed her publicly, silencing the court with his support. The gamble worked. Loyalty replaced resentment, effort replaced despair, and the estate began to heal. Those who had sneered now bowed their heads, not to a duke's wife chosen for beauty, but to a woman who had earned their respect. Years later, at a grand gathering far more splendid than the one where her life had changed, Ilara stood confidently at the Duke's side. Her father, smaller somehow, offered stiff congratulations. Seraphine watched from afar, her beauty unchanged but her certainty gone. Ilara felt no triumph in their discomfort, only a quiet strength. She had been rejected once, deemed unworthy by those who should have protected her, but she had been chosen, not as an ornament, not as a consolation prize, but as a partner. And in choosing herself at last, she had transformed rejection into victory and silence into a voice that could no longer be ignored.